Power isn't always loud. It isn't always a thunderous declaration or a show of force. Sometimes true power is the quiet dignity of a woman holding the world in her hands, waiting for the perfect moment to reveal it. It's the calm in the eye of a storm of prejudice, a storm that erupted one Tuesday afternoon in the bustling terminal of Chicago O'Hare International Airport. For one gate agent, it was just another day of exerting her tiny sliver of authority. For Dr. Althea Williams, it was a painful reminder that even when you own the game, some people will only ever see the color of your skin. This is the story of how a single piece of paper dismantled a career, exposed a rotten system, and proved that the best revenge is not just living well, but owning it all. The air in Terminal 3 of Chicago O'Hare was a familiar symphony of chaos. The low rumble of rolling suitcases on linoleum, the distant distorted calls for final boarding, the scent of overpriced coffee and Cinnabon. It was the generic backdrop to 1,000 daily dramas. Dr. Althea Williams, however, was an island of tranquility in this rushing river of humanity. Dressed in a tailored navy blue pantsuit that spoke of quiet expense rather than loud luxury, she exuded an aura of calm competence. Her hair was styled in immaculate locks, adorned with a few subtle gold cuffs that caught the light. At 48, her face was largely unlined, a testament to a life of discipline, though her eyes held a depth that hinted at battles fought and won in boardrooms and beyond. She held a sleek leather portfolio in one hand and her phone in the other, reviewing preliminary quarterly reports from her latest acquisition. Her flight, Apex Air 719, to Seattle was scheduled to board in 20 minutes. The trip wasn't for business, a rarity for her. Her mother Eleanor had taken a bad fall, and while she was stable, Althea knew the healing power of a daughter's presence. Nothing else mattered. She had cleared her schedule, delegated tasks to her ruthlessly efficient executive team at Orion Holdings Group, and booked the first available seat. It just happened to be in first-class seat 2A. She had built an empire from the ground up. Her AI-driven logistics software had revolutionized the global supply chain, and she had cannily reinvested the profits, creating Orion Holdings as a parent company for a diverse portfolio of assets. She bought struggling companies with good bones and restructured them, breathing new life into forgotten brands. Apex Air was one of her more recent and more challenging acquisitions. The legacy airline was bleeding money, plagued by poor customer service and outdated infrastructure. Althea saw potential. She believed in its people, but knew a cultural overhaul was necessary. She just hadn't realized how necessary until today. As the pre-boarding announcement for families and military personnel concluded, Althea closed her portfolio and walked towards Gate K-12. The line for first class was short, only a handful of people. In front of her, a man in a rumpled suit flashed his ticket and was waved through with a practiced smile. Then it was her turn. She stepped forward and presented her digital boarding pass on her phone to the gate agent. The agent, a woman in her late 40s with harsh blonde highlights and a name tag that read Karen, barely glanced at it. Her eyes, a flat, disinterested blue, flickered from the phone screen up to Althea's face, and in that single fractional moment, the atmosphere shifted. The practiced customer service smile that the man before her had received vanished, replaced by a tight, thin line. "Phone screen's too dim," Karen snapped, her voice carrying a grating edge of impatience. "I can't scan it." Althea, unfazed, adjusted the brightness to its maximum setting. "My apologies." "How is this?" Karen squinted, making a theatrical show of the effort. She aimed the scanner, and it beeped affirmatively. But she didn't wave Althea through. Instead, her eyes narrowed. She looked at the name on her screen, Dr. Althea Williams, and then back at Althea's face. A small, almost imperceptible sneer tugged at the corner of her mouth. "I'm going to need to see your ID," she said, her tone no longer just impatient but accusatory. Althea felt a familiar, weary sigh rise in her chest, but she kept her expression placid. It was a dance she knew well. The random checks that were never random. The extra scrutiny. The unspoken question. "How did you get here?" "Of course," Althea said, reaching into her handbag for her wallet. She produced her driver's license and handed it over. Karen took at her acrylic nails, tapping a sharp rhythm against the plastic. She held it next to Althea's face, comparing the photo with an exaggerated, almost comical level of scrutiny. "Althea Williams," she read aloud, drawing the name out as if it were a foreign concept. "Yes, that's me," Althea replied. Her voice still professional. Karen handed the license back, but still didn't motion for her to board. Her gaze swept over Althea's expensive but understated attire, her composed demeanor. To Karen, it was a puzzle that didn't fit. In her mind, the pieces were all wrong. This woman didn't belong in first class. The thought, ugly and immediate, solidified into a stubborn conviction. This had to be some kind of mistake. Or worse, a fraud. "There seems to be a flag on this ticket," Karen said, the lie sliding out with practiced ease. She began tapping furiously at her keyboard, a pantomime of diligence. "I'm not sure you're cleared to board." Behind Althea, the rest of the first-class line was beginning to form, and murmurs of impatience rippled through the small crowd. Althea stood her ground, her tranquility a stark contrast to the agent's manufactured hostility. The game had begun. The word flag hung in the air heavy and accusatory. Althea knew there was no flag on her ticket. She had booked it herself less than 3 hours ago through the executive concierge service that handled all her travel. It was a top-tier, fully flexible first-class fare. There was no conceivable reason for a flag. "A flag," Althea repeated, her voice laced with a polite skepticism that only seemed to irritate the gate agent further. "Could you please tell me what the issue is? Perhaps I can help you clear it up." Karen Miller looked up from her screen, a triumphant glint in her eyes. This was her domain. Behind this counter, she was not an underpaid, overlooked employee dealing with a surly public. She was the gatekeeper. She was the authority. And this woman with her calm superiority and expensive clothes was not going to get past her. "It's an internal security matter," Karen said dismissively, waving a vague hand at her monitor. "I can't discuss the details. All I can tell you is that this ticket has been flagged for review and you won't be boarding until it's resolved." The line behind Althea was growing longer, now spilling out into the main concourse. A businessman in a pinstripe suit grumbled, "Come on, what's the holdup?" Karen ignored him, her focus entirely on Althea. It was becoming personal. Every ounce of her own life's frustrations, the mortgage she was struggling to pay, the son who wouldn't call her back, the promotion she'd been passed over for, in favor of a younger, slicker colleague, was being channeled into this single interaction. She saw Althea not as a customer, but as a symbol of everything she felt she was denied. And here now she had the power to deny something in return. "I assure you there must be a mistake," Althea said, her patience beginning to fray, though her voice remained steady. "My name is Dr. Althea Williams. My travel is handled by the Orion Executive Office. Perhaps you could check under that account." The mention of an executive account only hardened Karen's resolve. "Ma'am, a lot of people try to use fancy names to get through. It doesn't change the flag on the screen." She gestured with her thumb over her shoulder. "You'll need to step aside. You're holding up the entire boarding process." This was the classic power play public shaming. Isolate the target, create pressure from the crowd, and force them to retreat. But Althea Williams had not built a multi-billion-dollar corporation by retreating. "I will not be stepping aside," Althea stated simply. Her voice didn't rise, but it acquired a new density, a firmness that made a few people in the line stop checking their phones and pay attention. "I am a confirmed first-class passenger with a valid ticket and identification. You have provided no legitimate reason for denying me boarding. Therefore, I will be waiting right here until you allow me to board." A flush of angry red crept up Karen's neck. The nerve of this woman. To defy her so openly. "Ma'am, if you refuse to follow my instructions, I will have to call airport security." Karen threatened, her voice rising in pitch. "You are causing a disturbance." "The only disturbance," Althea countered, her gaze unwavering, "is your refusal to do your job. You have scanned my pass. You have verified my identity. Now you will either let me on this plane, or you will provide me with your supervisor's name and a concrete, verifiable reason for this flag." The direct challenge left Karen momentarily speechless. Her usual tactics of intimidation and bureaucratic runaround weren't working. This woman wasn't cowering. She wasn't getting angry or loud, which would have given Karen the perfect excuse to call security. She was simply calmly refusing to be dismissed. A young man in the line wearing a hoodie and large headphones pulled one ear off. "Just let her on the plane, lady," he said. "We all want to get going." Karen shot him a venomous look. "Sir, this is a security matter. Would you rather we just let anyone on the plane?" She emphasized the word anyone, her eyes cutting back to Althea. The implication was clear and ugly. The air crackled with tension. Phones were starting to emerge, not just to check the time, but to record. A woman a few feet away had her screen angled perfectly to capture the entire scene at the counter. Karen, blinded by her own prejudice and the rush of power, didn't notice or didn't care. "I've had enough of this," Karen declared, picking up the phone at her station. "I'm calling my supervisor. You can explain your situation to him." She punched in a number, her back pointedly turned to Althea. She was escalating, confident that her system, would back her up. She was about to find out that the wall of authority she had built around herself was about to come crashing down, and Althea Williams was holding the wrecking ball. The supervisor, a harried-looking man named Daniel Peterson, arrived within 5 minutes. He had the perpetually stressed look of middle management, slightly rumpled shirt, a tie loosened just enough to signal he was overwhelmed, and a Bluetooth earpiece that seemed permanently affixed. He approached the gate with a practiced, placating smile that didn't quite reach his weary eyes. "Karen, what seems to be the problem here?" he asked, his voice a low murmur, trying to de-escalate the increasingly public scene. Karen launched into a dramatic, whispered retelling, gesturing towards Althea as if she were a piece of dangerous evidence. "Daniel, this woman's ticket came up with a security flag, a serious one. I asked her to step aside while we sort it out, and she's refusing. She's becoming aggressive and holding up the entire flight." The word aggressive was a deliberate, calculated choice. Althea hadn't raised her voice, made a single threatening gesture, or even lost her composure. But the label once applied to a black woman in a moment of conflict had a poisonous power. Daniel's eyes flickered towards Althea, a new wariness in his expression. He turned to Althea, his professional smile back in place. "Ma'am, I'm Daniel Peterson, the station supervisor. I understand there's some confusion with your ticket. If you'll just step over here with me, I'm sure we can get this sorted out quickly and get everyone on their way." He gestured to a desolate corner away from the gate. It was another tactic of dismissal. Isolate, contain, and control the narrative away from public view. Althea did not move. "Mr. Peterson," she began, her voice as crisp and clear as a new banknote. "There is no confusion. There is only a refusal of service. Your agent Karen claims there is a security flag on my ticket, yet she has failed to provide any specifics. I have provided a valid boarding pass and a government-issued photo ID. I have been polite and patient. Now my patience has run out. I am not stepping aside. I am boarding my flight." Daniel's smile faltered. He was caught between a belligerent employee he was supposed to support and a customer who was articulate firm, and he was beginning to suspect completely in the right. But company policy and the path of least resistance was to back his team first. "Ma'am, I understand your frustration," he said, his tone condescendingly gentle, as if speaking to a child. "But these security protocols are in place for everyone's safety. If Karen says there's a flag, I have to trust her judgment until we can verify it." "Then verify it," Althea challenged. "You have a computer right there. My flight is to Seattle to see my ailing mother. I will not be delayed by vague, unsubstantiated claims. Look up my ticket. Look up my name. You will find nothing amiss." Pressured Daniel reluctantly moved behind the counter. Karen hovered at his shoulder, whispering, "I'm telling you, Daniel, something's not right. Look at her. That's a full-fare first-class ticket booked 3 hours ago. It's a classic pattern for credit card fraud." Her whisper was just loud enough for Althea and those closest in line to hear. It was a baseless, slanderous accusation. Althea's expression for the first time hardened from calm patience to cold fury. The insinuation was clear. A black woman couldn't possibly afford such a ticket legitimately. Daniel typed, his brow furrowed. After a moment, he looked up, a confused expression on his face. "There's no flag on the account," he admitted, looking at Karen. "I don't see any security alerts." Karen's face paled for a second, then hardened again. "Well, the system must be slow. I saw it. It popped up and disappeared. It must be a system glitch. We can't take the risk." It was a pathetic, transparent lie, and everyone knew it. The crowd was now firmly on Althea's side. The man who had initially grumbled was now shaking his head in disgust. The woman filming was still recording her phone, held steady. Daniel, however, was now in a terrible position. Admitting his employee had lied would be a logistical and HR nightmare. Doubling down was easier. "Ma'am," he said, turning back to Althea, his voice now sterner. "My agent saw a security alert. Even if it was a temporary glitch, our policy requires a full manual verification in these cases. We will have to reissue your ticket, which means you will likely miss this flight. We can book you on the next available one this evening." The sheer, unmitigated gall of his statement was breathtaking. They were going to punish her for their employee's malicious fiction. Althea let out a short, sharp breath that was almost a laugh, but it held no humor. It was the sound of a limit being reached, the sound of a decision being made. "So, to be clear," she said, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous calm, "your employee Karen racially profiled me. She invented a security flag to deny me boarding. You have verified that no such flag exists. And now, instead of apologizing and allowing me to board the flight I paid for, you are doubling down on her lie and telling me I will be punished for it by missing my flight to see my sick mother. Is that the official position of Apex Air?" She had laid the trap perfectly. By summarizing their actions so baldly, she exposed the raw prejudice and bureaucratic cowardice at the heart of the matter. Daniel's face went white. He opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked at Karen, whose face was a mask of defiant resentment. He looked at the passengers, their expressions a mixture of pity and contempt for him. He looked at the phone recording the whole debacle. He had no idea that the woman he was stonewalling didn't just have a ticket. She had the entire airline, and the time for polite requests was officially over. "That is our position for now," Daniel finally managed to say, his voice weak but stubborn. "Policy is policy. We have to follow procedure." Althea nodded slowly, a profound sense of disappointment settling over her. She had hoped for reason for a moment of decency to prevail, but it was clear that would not happen. The system was designed to protect itself even when it was demonstrably wrong. "I see," she said softly. She took a step back from the counter, and for a moment Karen and Daniel exchanged a look of smug triumph. They thought she was finally retreating. They were wrong. She was merely clearing the stage for her final act. Althea placed her sleek leather portfolio on top of her carry-on suitcase. The clasps opened with two distinct, sharp clicks that cut through the low hum of the terminal. "You speak of policy, Mr. Peterson." Althea began, her voice resonating with a newfound authority that made everyone, including the pilot and first officer who had just arrived at the gate to inquire about the delay, turn to look at her. "You speak of procedure. Let me tell you about the most important policy at Apex Air One that I personally approved 3 months ago at our last quarterly board meeting." Daniel and Karen exchanged a confused look. Our last board meeting, Althea's hands moved with deliberate grace. She didn't look angry anymore. She looked like a professor about to deliver a lecture or a judge about to deliver a verdict. "The policy is called the Dignity and Equity Mandate," she continued, her eyes locked on Daniel. "It states that any employee at any level found to be engaging in discriminatory behavior or racial profiling is subject to immediate termination. Not suspension, not a review. Termination. It was designed to root out the very kind of prejudice that your agent Karen has displayed here today." Karen scoffed, a short, ugly sound. "And who are you to be talking about company policy? You're just some passenger trying to bully your way onto a flight." Althea's lips curved into a faint, sad smile. "That's where you are mistaken." She reached into the portfolio and drew out not a passport or another form of ID, but a large, cream-colored document aged and protected in a clear archival sleeve. It was ornate with an engraved border and heavy deckled edges. It looked like something from another era. "When I led the acquisition of this airline 6 months ago," Althea said, her voice now ringing with clarity and power, "the retiring chairman, a Mr. Walter Finch, gave me this as a symbolic gesture. He was the founder of Apex Air back in 1985. This," she said, holding up the document for all to see, "is the original master stock certificate for the controlling interest in Apex Air's parent company, Orion Holdings Group." The crowd gasped. Phones were now universally out, every single one pointed at the unfolding drama. "My name," Althea declared, her voice cutting through the stunned silence like a diamond, "is Dr. Althea Williams. I am the founder and CEO of Orion Holdings Group. I am the majority shareholder of this airline. And as of this moment, you, Karen Miller, and you, Daniel Peterson, are in direct violation not only of federal anti-discrimination laws, but of the core tenets of the company I own." She laid the certificate on the counter. The embossed gold seal of the corporation gleamed under the harsh terminal lighting. The signature of Walter Finch was clearly visible, as was the legal transfer of ownership notarized and dated to one Dr. Althea Williams. The blood drained from Karen Miller's face. Her defiant sneer crumbled into a mask of pure abject horror. Her mouth opened and closed silently, like a fish gasping for air. She stared at the document, then at Althea, the reality of what she had done crashing down on her with the force of a physical blow. She had tried to block a customer. a black woman she had deemed unworthy from boarding a plane, only to discover that this woman owned the very ground beneath her feet. Daniel Peterson looked as if he had been struck by lightning. His jaw hung slack, his eyes wide with terror. He stumbled back a step, his hand coming up to loosen a tie that was suddenly choking him. The entire world had just tilted on its axis. He hadn't just failed a customer, he had publicly and spectacularly failed the owner of the entire company. The pilot, a tall, silver-haired man named Captain Evans, stepped forward. He had watched the last few minutes of the exchange with growing alarm. He leaned over, peered at the stock certificate, his eyes widening as he recognized the seal and the legendary founder's name. He then looked at Althea, his expression shifting from professional concern to profound respect. "Dr. Williams," he said, his voice a deep baritone that commanded attention. "I am Captain Evans. Please accept my sincerest apologies on behalf of the flight crew for this disgraceful conduct. We would be honored to welcome you aboard." He turned to his first officer. "Get her bags. We'll stow them in the cockpit if we have to." Then he fixed Karen and Daniel with a glare of pure ice. "You two, don't move. You have a lot to answer for." The power dynamic had not just shifted, it had been utterly and irrevocably shattered. The gate agent who held all the authority just minutes ago was now a statue of shame, and the woman she had tried to humiliate was being personally escorted onto the aircraft by the captain, the undeniable master of his vessel. The karma was just beginning to roll in. The walk down the jet bridge was surreal. Captain Evans led the way with Althea following her composure, a mask of steel over a sea of roiling emotions. The first officer followed silently with her carry-on bag. The other first-class passengers who had witnessed the entire spectacle followed at a respectful distance, their earlier impatience replaced by a mixture of awe and embarrassment. The whispers followed them like a wake. "Did you see her face? Owned the whole airline. My God. That gate agent is so fired." As Althea stepped onto the aircraft, the lead flight attendant, a woman named Maria, greeted her with a wide professional smile that faltered slightly as she saw the grim-faced captain escorting a passenger. "Captain Evans, is everything all right?" she asked. "Everything is far from all right, Maria," Captain Evans said gravely. He turned to Althea. "Dr. Williams, this is your aircraft. Please allow me to show you to your seat." The title "your aircraft" sent a ripple through the cabin crew. Their eyes widened. Maria, a veteran of 30 years, immediately understood. Her posture straightened, her professionalism kicking into a higher gear. "Dr. Williams," Maria said, her voice filled with a genuine warmth and deference that had been so starkly absent at the gate. "Welcome aboard. Please let me take your coat. Can I get you something to drink before takeoff? Champagne. A water." "Water would be lovely, thank you, Maria." Althea said, her voice a bit softer now. The adrenaline was beginning to fade, leaving a profound weariness in its place. She settled into seat 2A, the plush leather, a small comfort. She stared out the small oval window at the flurry of activity on the tarmac, but she didn't see it. Her mind was replaying the ugly confrontation. It wasn't triumph she felt. It was a deep, aching sadness. Sadness that in the 21st century, she still had to carry a symbolic scepter of her own power just to be treated with basic human dignity. Sadness that her journey to her mother's bedside had been tainted by such gratuitous bigotry. The rest of the first-class cabin boarded in near silence, acutely aware of the woman sitting by the window. The businessman who had been grumbling earlier caught her eye as he passed. He gave a short, respectful nod. "Well handled," he muttered under his breath. Once all the passengers were boarded, Captain Evans's voice came over the intercom. But it wasn't the usual cheerful pre-flight announcement. His tone was somber and serious. "Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is your captain speaking. We will be closing the cabin doors shortly for our on-time departure to Seattle. However, before we do, I feel it is necessary to address the delay you all experienced during boarding. What you witnessed at the gate was an unacceptable failure of our airline's commitment to respect, dignity, and equality. The behavior of our ground staff was contrary to everything Apex Air stands for." He paused, and the entire cabin was silent, hanging on his every word. "On behalf of the entire company, I want to extend a formal and profound apology to a distinguished guest in our first-class cabin for the disgraceful treatment she received. I want to assure all of you that this incident will be investigated at the highest levels and that swift, decisive action will be taken. We do not and will not tolerate discrimination of any kind. Thank you for your patience and understanding. Cabin crew, please prepare for departure." It was an unprecedented announcement. A public mea culpa delivered with the full authority of the flight's commander. For Althea, it was the first sign that the culture she wanted to build might just be possible. Some people like Captain Evans and Maria already embodied it. They were the foundation she could build upon. As the plane pushed back from the gate, Althea glanced out her window and saw the scene she had left behind. Daniel Peterson was on his phone, pacing frantically. Karen Miller was still standing behind the counter, but she looked smaller, now diminished. She was staring blankly at the departing aircraft, her career and her life irrevocably altered, disappearing from view as the 737 taxied toward the runway. Maria arrived with a crystal glass of chilled water on a small linen napkin. "Dr. Williams," she said quietly, "I've been with this airline for 30 years. I've seen it all. I just want to say thank you. Some things need to be brought into the light." Althea looked up at the flight attendant and saw a genuine human connection, a shared understanding. She gave a small, grateful smile. "Thank you, Maria. Let's just get to Seattle." The jet engines spooled up with a powerful roar, and the plane accelerated down the runway. As it lifted into the sky, banking over the sprawling city of Chicago, Althea finally allowed herself to close her eyes. The battle at the gate was over. The war for the soul of her company had just begun. While Apex Air 719 climbed to its cruising altitude of 35,000 feet, the storm on the ground was just making landfall. The video filmed by the passenger in line was less than 5 minutes long, but it was devastatingly effective. It had been uploaded to Twitter before the plane even left the gate with a simple explosive caption, "Gate agent at Apex Air O'Hare tries to block a black woman from first class. You will not believe who she is." Phone. Flying while black, Apex Air. The post included the video, which clearly captured Karen's condescending tone, her false claim of a security flag, Daniel's cowardly complicity, and the stunning cinematic climax of Althea revealing the stock certificate. By the time Althea's flight was over Indiana, the video had 100,000 views. By the time it crossed the Mississippi River, it had hit 1 million. It had been retweeted by celebrities, activists, and business journalists. The hashtags #ApexAir and #KarenMiller were trending nationally. The corporate headquarters of Apex Air in Dallas, Texas, was in full-blown crisis mode. The phone of Richard Sterling, the CEO Althea had installed to run the airline's day-to-day operations, began melting down with calls from his frantic PR team. Richard was a slick, seasoned executive in his late 50s who thought he had seen everything. He watched the video on his computer, his face growing paler with each passing second. He saw the company logo on Karen's uniform on the signage behind her and felt a wave of nausea. He had spent the last 6 months trying to craft a new narrative for the airline, one of inclusivity modernization and premium service. In under 5 minutes, 2 of his employees had burned that narrative to the ground. And then he saw the face of the woman they were tormenting. "Oh no," he whispered, pushing his chair back from his desk. "No, no, no." He recognized her immediately. It was Dr. Althea Williams, the brilliant, formidable, and intensely private owner of the entire company. The woman who had personally interviewed him and entrusted him with her multi-billion-dollar investment. The woman who had a zero-tolerance policy for incompetence and bigotry. His phone rang. It was an internal line, but the caller ID simply read AW, personal. His blood ran cold. It was her. Calling from the plane's satellite phone. He answered on the first ring. "Althea," he said, his voice strained. "Richard." Her voice came through calm and icy. "I assume you've seen the video." "I have. Althea, There are no words. I am horrified. Appalled. I am so profoundly sorry." "Save the apologies, Richard." She cut in her tone, leaving no room for excuses. "What I need right now is action. The 2 employees, Karen Miller and Daniel Peterson. What is their status?" "They've been suspended pending a full investigation," Richard said, falling back on standard corporate procedure. "No," Althea said flatly. "That is not acceptable. This is not a situation that requires investigation. The evidence is on the mobile phones of several million people. They slandered a customer, falsified a security threat, and attempted to deny boarding based on racial prejudice. Then they lied to cover their tracks. They are a cancer of incompetence and hatred in our organization. You will terminate their employment. Not tomorrow, not in an hour. Now. Is that understood?" "Yes, of course," Richard stammered. "Consider it done." "Good. Second, I want a public statement issued before my flight lands in Seattle. It will not be a vague corporate speak apology about not meeting our standards. It will name the employees. It will call their behavior racist and unacceptable. It will state that they have been terminated. It will contain a direct and personal apology to me, Dr. Althea Williams. And it will outline the immediate steps we are taking to ensure this never happens again. I am texting my executive assistant the details of what those steps will be. You will announce the Williams Initiative, a new mandatory top-to-bottom training program on de-escalation implicit bias and cultural competency for every single employee, starting with the executive suite. Are you writing this down, Richard? Yes, Althea. Every word. Excellent. I will be off the grid until we land. I expect to see that statement live on every newswire by then. Do not disappoint me, Richard. The line went dead. Richard Sterling leaned back in his chair, breathing heavily. This was the worst crisis of his career, but it was also a moment of absolute clarity. Dr. Williams wasn't just fixing a PR problem. She was performing surgery on the soul of the company. He immediately called the head of HR. "Janet, it's Richard. Get security and escort Karen Miller and Daniel Peterson from the premises at O'Hare. Their employment with Apex Air is terminated effective immediately. Yes, immediately. No severance. Cause for termination is gross misconduct and violation of the dignity and equity mandate. I don't care what the union says will fight it. The evidence is irrefutable." Next, he called his PR team. "Scrap the draft. We're going nuclear. I'm writing the statement myself, and it's going out in the next hour." The hurricane had made landfall, and the old structures of Apex Air were being torn down to their foundations. From 35,000 feet, Althea Williams was directing the storm, ensuring that when it passed, the ground would be cleared for something new, something better to be built in its place. By the time Apex Air 719 began its smooth descent through the misty cloud cover into Seattle, the world Althea Williams had left behind at Gate K-12 was a smoldering crater. The hurricane had not just made landfall, it had ripped through the digital landscape, leaving behind a wreckage of careers and a new indelible chapter in the annals of corporate accountability. The story wasn't just about an airline anymore. It was a global conversation about race power and the electrifying moment when a quiet truth becomes an undeniable roar. For Karen Miller, the end came not with a bang, but with a sterile, brutally efficient phone call. She was still standing in the employee break room, trying to sip a cup of lukewarm coffee with trembling hands, when her personal cell phone buzzed. It was a blocked number. "Is this Karen Miller?" a clipped, unfamiliar female voice asked. "Yes, who is this?" Karen replied, her own voice tight with a mixture of defiance and terror. "This is Janet Lowell from Apex Air Corporate Human Resources. I am calling to inform you that effective immediately, your employment with Apex Air has been terminated with cause." The words hung in the air, clinical and cold. Karen felt the coffee cup slip from her fingers, splashing across the linoleum floor. "Terminated. You can't. I have a union representative. There's a procedure," she stammered, her mind grasping for the bureaucratic shields that had always protected her. "The cause for termination is gross misconduct, including discriminatory practices, endangerment of the company's brand, and public dereliction of duty, all in direct violation of the Dignity and Equity Mandate, which you signed on March 12th of this year," the voice recited, devoid of any emotion. "There will be no severance package. A security officer will meet you at your station to escort you while you collect your personal belongings. Your final paycheck will be mailed to you. Do you have any questions?" Karen's mind reeled. Questions? She had a million. But what could she ask? "Don't you know who I am?" was no longer a viable defense. It was a misunderstanding, was a lie so transparent it had been viewed and dissected by millions of people. She was no longer a gatekeeper with a sliver of authority. She was a global meme, a hashtag, the villain in a story that was now rocketing around the world. She opened her mouth, but only a dry, croaking sound came out. "Seeing as there are no questions, we consider this matter concluded. We wish you the best in your future endeavors." The voice said a final, meaningless corporate platitude before the line went dead. The silence that followed was more deafening than any shouting match. The security escort was grim-faced and silent. As he watched her pack a small box with a few faded photos and a coffee mug that said, "World's Best Mom," her colleagues averted their eyes, whispering behind their hands. She was a pariah. The walk through the terminal was a gauntlet of shame. She could feel the stares, hear the whispers. Someone pointed a phone at her. She fled her face, burning the reality of her new life crashing down upon her. That night she watched herself on the national news. She saw her own face twisted in a sneer of petty arrogance, and for the first time she saw not a diligent employee doing her job, but a bitter, ugly caricature. The person the world saw was a monster, and in the horrifying quiet of her living room, she was forced to wonder if they were right. Daniel Peterson's professional demise was more complex, but just as absolute. As a manager, he believed he was insulated. He believed he could spin this. He spent an hour drafting a groveling excuse-laden email to Richard Sterling, the CEO, explaining how he was managing a difficult situation and attempting to de-escalate. Before he could hit send, his own phone rang. It was Richard Sterling himself. "Daniel," the CEO's voice was like a chip of ice in his ear. "I'm calling you as a courtesy before HR does. You're finished here." "Richard, wait," Daniel pleaded, his voice cracking. "You have to understand the situation on the ground was chaotic. I was following protocol." "Protocol." Richard's voice, usually so smooth and political, was raw with fury. "Your protocol is to enable racism, to back an employee who is fabricating security threats, to stand there and lie to the face of the woman who owns this entire goddamn company. You didn't de-escalate anything, Daniel. You poured gasoline on a fire. You are the poster child for cowardly management, and you have no place at Apex Air." "I have 20 years in this industry, Richard. My record is spotless." "Your record was spotless. Now your record is a viral video of you failing spectacularly at the most basic tenets of leadership and human decency. Clean out your desk. HR will be in touch." The line clicked dead. Daniel sat in his small office overlooking the airfield, stunned. He opened his laptop and went to LinkedIn, the muscle memory of a career man kicking in. He started browsing jobs, but the futility of it was crushing. His name was now toxic. He saw an article in Forbes titled, "Anatomy of a Corporate Implosion: How Apex Air's Middle Management Failed." It featured a screenshot of his face circled in red. His sin wasn't the active malice of Karen Miller. It was the passive cowardice of a man who chose the easiest path instead of the right one. In the corporate world, that was an unforgivable sin. His 20-year career hadn't ended with a golden parachute, but with a global digital tombstone. Meanwhile, in Seattle, Althea deplaned into a different reality. Waiting for her at the end of the jet bridge wasn't a throng of reporters, but a single impeccably dressed man in his early 60s. He was Robert Chen, the Seattle station chief for Apex Air, and he looked as if he were about to face a firing squad. "Dr. Williams," he began, his hands clasped nervously in front of him. On behalf of the entire Seattle station, I am so deeply, profoundly sorry for what you endured. It is inexcusable." Althea looked at the man's face and saw not fear of her power, but genuine shame for the company's failure. It was a start. "Thank you, Robert," she said, her voice tired but firm. "It is not your apology to give, but I appreciate the sentiment. The failure was in Chicago, not Seattle." "A failure anywhere is a failure everywhere, ma'am," he replied, his words echoing the very philosophy she was trying to instill. He personally escorted her through the terminal, using a private exit to a waiting car she had arranged. There was no fanfare, just a quiet, respectful efficiency. The message from the top had clearly cascaded down through the entire organization. With the speed of light, things were going to be different now. She arrived at the hospital, the scent of antiseptic cleaner, a stark contrast to the jet fuel of the airport. She found her mother's room and paused at the door, taking a deep breath. In this room, she wasn't a CEO or a corporate titan. She was just Althea Eleanor's daughter. She entered to find her mother sitting up in bed, a mischievous glint in her tired eyes. The television was on, and a pundit was dissecting the Apex Air public statement. "Well, look at you," Eleanor said, her voice raspy, but full of its usual fire. "I turn my back for one afternoon, and you're all over the national news. Can't take you anywhere." A genuine relieved laugh escaped Althea's lips. She rushed to the bedside and hugged her mother gently. "Just handling a little business, Mama." "I saw the video," Eleanor said, her expression turning serious. She took her daughter's hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "That woman's face, the way she looked at you. It was the same look Mrs. Davison gave you in the 3rd grade when she accused you of cheating on that science test. Remember, you came home crying because you had the highest score in the class and she couldn't believe it. You've been fighting this same ugly fight your whole life. The memory buried for decades came flooding back. The feeling of injustice of being so good at something that it became suspicious. "I'd forgotten about that," Althea whispered. "Well, I haven't," Eleanor said fiercely. "I told you then, and I'll tell you now, don't you ever let them make you feel small. You didn't just buy an airline, baby. You bought the whole damn sky. Don't let anyone tell you where you can and cannot fly." Tears welled in Althea's eyes, not of sadness for the incident, but of profound love and gratitude for the woman who had forged her spine of steel. In that quiet hospital room, the corporate crisis faded away, and all that was left was the unshakable bond between a mother and daughter, a bond that had been the true source of her strength all along. The weeks that followed were a blur of focused, relentless action. The Williams Initiative was not just a press release, it became the new beating heart of the company. Althea herself led the first session in the main boardroom in Dallas. The air in the room was thick with tension. Her entire executive team, including Richard Sterling, sat around the polished mahogany table bracing for a lecture. They didn't get one. Althea stood at the head of the table, not with a PowerPoint presentation, but with just a glass of water. "Forget the video," she began, her voice quiet but commanding. "I want to tell you how it felt. To stand there with a valid ticket, a valid ID, and be treated like a criminal. To be publicly accused of fraud. To have a man who is paid 6 figures to be a leader look you in the eye and choose to protect a lie rather than help a customer. I want you to imagine it's your wife, your daughter, your mother standing at that gate. What would you want to happen next?" She let the question hang in the air. She didn't talk about stock prices or brand reputation. She talked about dignity. She made it personal. She made it human. The initiative she designed was radical. It involved intensive, immersive training led by sociologists and de-escalation experts. It tied executive bonuses directly to improvements in customer satisfaction scores, specifically among minority travelers. It created a new anonymous reporting system, the Gate K-12 hotline, for employees to report discriminatory behavior without fear of reprisal. The culture began to shift. It was slow, painful work. There was resistance. Some veteran employees grumbled about woke nonsense. A few quit, but far more stayed. They participated in difficult, honest conversations. They learned. They started to see their jobs not just as a series of tasks, but as a commitment to a standard of human decency. The business world, initially skeptical, watched in astonishment. After an initial 10% dip, Apex Air's stock didn't just recover, it soared. A viral story of racism had been masterfully converted into a testament of corporate integrity. Minority business groups and civil rights organizations publicly lauded the company's response. Contracts that had been out of reach were suddenly on the table. Forbes ran a follow-up cover story, "The Williams Effect: How Apex Air Turned a Crisis into Its Greatest Asset." 6 months later, Althea sat in her office, her mother now fully recovered and happily tending her garden back home. On her desk was the first quarterly report on the Williams Initiative. Customer complaints related to discrimination were down 92%. Employee morale after an initial dip was at a 5-year high. Apex Air was ranked #1 in the industry for customer service. She looked out her window at the endless blue sky. She rarely thought of Karen Miller or Daniel Peterson anymore. They were ghosts' cautionary tales from a past she had refused to accept. Her victory wasn't in their ruin, but in the thriving, healthier organization that had risen from the ashes of their failure. She hadn't just won a battle at a gate. She had changed the map. She had proven that power, true power, wasn't just about owning things. It was about making them better. And the sky, her sky, had never looked clearer. The story of Dr. Althea Williams and the gate at O'Hare is a powerful reminder that our actions, no matter how small they may seem, have consequences that can ripple out further than we can ever imagine. For Karen Miller, a moment of prejudice born from insecurity led to her complete undoing. For Dr. Williams, a moment of profound disrespect became a catalyst to reshape an entire corporation in her own image, strong, dignified, and intolerant of injustice. It proves that the ultimate karma isn't just about punishment. It's about balance. It's about a moment of ugly hate being transformed into a legacy of positive, lasting change. What would you have done in Dr. Williams's shoes? What do you think is the most important lesson from this story? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of justice and empowerment resonated with you, please give this video a like. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, and make sure you subscribe to our channel for more true stories of karma and consequence. Click that notification bell so you never miss an update. Thank you for listening.